My legal name is, I'll just give you the initial because I never liked my full name, is Linda L. Tarbutton. What brought me here was I was born here in 1948. Actually, I was born in what used to be the Army Hospital, which was set up in the El Mirador Hotel in Palm Springs. But I was born and raised here, just a couple of years difference. One we spent in Desert Center and 1 or 2 years in National City. But for the rest of the part, we came back when I was 4 years old. And then we were on Hacienda, and then we were on Buena Vista, and then we moved to our place on First Street, and I was there from the age of 5 on up until I left at the age of 19, 1 year after high school. My grandmother and grandfather lived a half a block away on the corner of Pearson and Cactus. They were one of the originals. Well, for that matter, my father was an original guy too. He drilled wells with my grandfather. But Nina and Grandpa, as we called her Nina because it's a long story. It was supposed to be Nana. That's the New England tradition. We couldn't say Nana, and it ended up Nina. So she and my grandfather, who was actually my step-grandfather, J.C. McGee, lived on the corner of Pearson and Cactus and had 2 buildings there. My grandfather got 2 lots. One was for his residential, and the other was a commercial building. And so we spent just as much time at my grandmother and grandfather's as we did at home. Back then, you didn't lock your doors. You left your doors and windows open. I mean, we had just swamp coolers. So we had our doors and windows open a lot. We didn't have any air conditioning in cars, so you drove with all the windows down. You left the keys in the car. My mother used to go and park at the store, which originally was the El Pueblo, which that building is still here. That was at the corner of Pearson and Palm. And she would just leave us in the car with the windows down, the keys in the car, or if we went in with her, then we'd go in with her, but you still left the keys in the car. You didn't worry about it. My dad used to talk about how they had a lot of cabins out here way back when in the 40s and the 30s, and the owners would just leave them open, unlocked, and then if somebody needed to stay overnight, they would come in, make themselves a home, eat whatever food that was left there, canned food, and then leave some of their own and go. And there was never any problems. I mean, this was the town I grew up in. Very safe. We walked to school. The school was like a block and a half away. The elementary school was on 2nd and Palm. Walked to school every day, walked home. We were probably some of the first people bused to school because there was only the elementary school. In fact, at one point, when I was in 1st grade, they put the 1st graders together with the slow 2nd graders, and the 2nd graders, the fast 2nd graders, together with the slow 3rd graders, and they just sort of combined classes because we didn't have enough to fill up. We didn't have enough teachers. And I went to elementary school all the way from kindergarten through 6th grade, and then we got bused to Palm Springs because that's where the junior high and high school were. And it was hard going to Palm Springs because here in DHS, a lot of us didn't have much money. We were pretty poor. In fact, I remember for at least a summer, if not longer, my dad wasn't even home. He worked in Vegas, and then he would come home on the weekends and then drive back to Vegas. And that's how he took care of the family. My mother was a waitress and did what she could. So when we got over there to Palm Springs, I mean, I went to school with Dinah Shore's daughter, with Red Skelton's daughter, and you definitely were lower class. And it was pretty strange. The other strange thing was when I was growing up here, it was basically white people. We did have some Mexicans, very few. I went to school with a lot of crippled children because we had the Angel View Crippled Children's Clinic. And so it was nothing to see people walking around in braces and crutches or being in wheelchairs in our classes. We didn't think anything about it. But we'd never seen a black person. And it just was a little strange growing up and having to go to Palm Springs and actually meet different races. It didn't mean anything. We didn't think anything about it. It was just different. When we were growing up, we had Coffey's Pools, which were up on 8th Street, and below that was their reservoir. They had this, I don't know how big it was, but it was awesome. It had green trees around it. I used to love it. And it had a fence, so you couldn't get into it. But they would drain their pools into that before they refilled them. And one time, we used to get flooded all the time. And one time, the reservoir overflowed and came down through the city and just totally washed everything out. We were making riverbeds and stuff trying to keep the water from going into houses. There was also the Highlands Pools. That was up on, gosh, Hacienda was green. I don't even know how far up it was, but below the foothills. And then there was it Tropical Palms? We could swim there too. That was at the corner of Hacienda and Palm. So we had that. That was good. We had pools that we could go to. In fact, I became a swimming instructor. And I taught swimming for 3 or 4 summers as well as life-saving. Another thing that I remember was the softball games. That was a big event. We'd hop in the car and we'd drive up to 8th Street. We'd usually see about 3 or 4 jackrabbits along the road, and we'd, have to dodge them or stop because you didn't want to kill the poor puppies. And we had softball games, and they used to think that my mother was married to her brother, because when Jack Maury, her brother, was up to bat, she was calling him honey and baby and everything else, and people used to think that was his wife until, at least the people who didn't know better. But that was a big event. We didn't have a lot to do when I was growing up. But it was okay. We did have the theater. That was at the corner of 2nd and Pearson, Palm. So we had that, and they had early matinees for a couple of years. And that stopped. I don't think my grandfather worked for my step-grandfather. My step-grandfather, which was my father's stepfather, apparently was the one who drilled the well at Coffey's. I did not know that. My brother told me that. I thought that my grandfather and my other grandfather, good God, I had 4 grandfathers. There was my mother's father, which was Orrin Maury, and he was in Anaheim. And then there was my mother's mother, which was Frances McGee, and she was married to J.C. or Clay or Jesse Clay, and they're the ones that lived next to what became the mortuary. And they were the 2 grandparents I knew the best. Then my father's mother remarried, and that was Earl Earl Howard. We called him Pappy, and apparently he's the one that helped drill the wells up at Coffey's. And my dad worked for him for a while. My dad, though, worked with his father back in the late 30s, early 40s, up at a place called Gurney's, which was located up in the foothills above Desert Hot Springs. And a lot of the stars used to go up there, and they would stay at Gurney's place because it was quiet. They could be themselves. They didn't have to put on a show or anything else. And then my dad would drive them across to Palm Springs over to the tennis club and everything. One of the stars that not that I remember, but that my dad used to talk about a lot was what they used to call, I believe she was known as the blonde bombshell, it was Jean Harlow. One of the 3 blondes that is well known in pictures. And my dad said she was the sweetest, nicest person that you could have met. And she had arranged for him to apprentice as a cabinet maker to a man in Hollywood who built things for the stars. And my dad really wanted to do it. I mean, well drilling was hard work. And besides that, it was hot out here. But my grandfather told him he would leave him the business. So my dad stayed. Well, one thing led to another, and the war came along, and my dad got drafted and served in the Hawaii, etc. And then later became a pilot in what was then the Army Air Corps. And when the war was over and he came home, my grandfather not only did not give him the house he had promised him, but he didn't let him be part of the business anymore. And so my dad he was left kind of footloose and fancy free. And that's when one of the other things that he did eventually was start working in Las Vegas. But he was an operating engineer, and he picked up work where he could here and there. And seasonal work, as anybody would know, wasn't a lot you could do. So that's one of the reasons why it was kind of rough. I never really knew my grandfather, Tarbutton, as a child growing up. We lived in the same town, obviously, but I didn't know who he was. I wasn't even sure if he existed, to tell you the truth. We were up and eating at the cafe. There was a cafe up at Coffey's where my mother worked as a waitress. And we would eat up there, I believe, generally dinners. Occasionally we would have our lunch up there because my dad was working and my mom was. And one day when we were up here, this nice older gentleman, I mean, I would have called him elderly at that time, but he was probably in his 60s, and I don't really consider myself elderly. So he said hello to my mother and kept on going, passed us by. And after he left, I asked my mom, who was that man? Because I'd never known him before. And she said, oh, that was your grandfather. So that was my first introduction to my grandfather. My grandfather chose his second wife over his original family, is about the best way I could say it. So we later got to know him. But it wasn't the same. I never really felt like he was a grandfather to me. My mother was originally a waitress. Well, actually, way back in the Second World War, my mother was, she was a plane watcher, or whatever they called it. They had that set up, AWS, and I looked that up to see what it was. But she was a plane spotter. So in case the enemy aircraft came over, she reported it, which of course she never reported anything because they never came over, but that's okay. She had a special little banner and everything that declared her the chief of operations or something. She also worked in the USO over there in Palm Springs. After the war, and when my brother was born D-Day +2, and I was born in 48, my mother did waitress work. Eventually, there was a library on Pearson Avenue, but not the one that later became a senior citizen, the senior citizens place. The first one was actually in the buildings that had sidewalk in front of them. There wasn't any sidewalk in DHS. I never learned to roller skate or do the skateboard because there was like 2 blocks of sidewalk at the 4 corners. The one 4-way stop in Desert Hot Springs, Pearson and Palm. And it basically was just one room. But I remember it being there when I was in 1st grade. And I used to go down and check out books. Not too long after that, it moved up to the building that was across the empty lot on the north side of Pearson. The empty lot separated O'Hara's Cafe and the library, and across the street was the Bank of America, and to the east of that was Lope's Liquor Store, and the post office was there. Anyway, my mom became assistant librarian to Catherine Bryson. It must have been 1958 or 59 when my mother was appointed librarian. And they had at one time the largest circulation in Riverside County for a small library. It was amazing. My mother would deliver books. When new books came in, she would set them aside for the people she knew would want them. And then we also had book deliveries to the shut-ins and stuff, and she would make those, or when we kids were old enough to drive, we would make them, and then bring back their books. People would come in and she'd have a book set aside for them, or they would say, I'd like a book about such and such, and she'd make sure that she could order one. She looked it up. She was a fantastic librarian. She also became a member of the Seroptimists and was very active in that. My grandmother, Frances McGee, was very active in the city and the Women's Auxiliary and the AFW, a member of the church, sang in the choir. She was a tenor in the choir. It was really cool. And she was well known in the city at that time. Not too people, I guess, have heard of her since then, which is kind of a shame. She was cool. Okay, when it was time, after I promoted from elementary school, the buses, there were 2 routes for the buses. There was the one route that went to North Palm Springs, and I'm not sure where that bus was parked, but a guy named Mr. Ham used to drive that bus. And it basically would hit from Pearson Boulevard on down. And then it would go down Palm, and then across on Dillon, and then south on Indian. Palm stopped at Dillon. That was it. Now our bus got parked at the elementary school, and then it would pick up the northern part of the so-called city. And it then would go out Pearson and pick up on Indian and take Indian down. Now in the days of the floods, which was like just about, well, we had flooding every year, but every other year or so, something washed out. There were times when we got to have holidays because the town was completely cut off. You could not get out of town. All the main roads were washed out. In fact, one of the great things that my mother used to do was load us kids up, and we would go out and check out each one of the washes. I mean, you know, You got to look for fun growing up in this town at that day and age. And there was the Great Flood, which washed out the road down by what used to be a gravel pit in Garnett. And so you couldn't go across Palm. So they had to take us out and around and pick up 111 off of the freeway and then come in that way to get to school. It was quite a long way around. Another interesting thing was the washes when we had the windstorms. Growing up here in town, we always got comprehensive on our cars because we had to replace our windshields at least once every 2 years because you always got caught in a wash. And the sand, I remember one time coming home from the Date Festival when the freeway, now Date Festival, as you know, is in India. There was a big highlight. There, you know, you look for the highlights. And the wind was so bad, my brother suggested we take the Power Line Road, okay? Which don't ask me where that is, but it was up off of Dillon and what have you. The wind was so bad that my grandmother, who was seated in the front part of the car, the sand, had to look out her window and tell my mother where the edge of the road was because it was completely obliterated by sand. She could not see. And I remember that the filter, air filter on the car got filled up with sand. And so my mother stopped the car, my brother and I got out. I had to hold the hood because otherwise it would have flown off. And my brother stood there with his back to all the sand, opened it up, banged out the air filter as best he could, put it back on, and the car was able to go again. Needless to say, the windshield was totally ruined by the time we got home. I also remember another time, Palm Springs weekend, big stuff, okay? So we would be going to school. We didn't always get off the same time that the others did when they came out for the Easter weekend, Easter week. And the sand was blowing like mad across Indian, and we were starting to go across. And there was this brand new Mustang, like say 65, that had decided that the sand was too bad, and he pulled off to the side of the road in order to whip a U-turn. Now, for anybody who actually lives out here and knows about the sand, you don't pull off the road because you're going to get stuck, which he did. And we passed that car going to school. Well, the next day coming back, it was still there, buried up, you know, to the frame in sand, but one side was completely bare. The paint had been taken all the way down to the basic gunmetal of the car. And let me tell you, we had a good laugh at that stupid fool in his brand new car that came out here to enjoy the Palm Springs during Easter break. Well, first, there's a couple good things I remember. Another, you know, you look, like I said, I keep saying this, you look for the highlights because in Desert Hot Springs, there wasn't much to do. One of the big things you could do was if you had a friend who had a car, then you got to go to Palm Springs and you got to cruise, okay? You never would cruise Desert Hot Springs, okay? Just wasn't anything to cruise. So they had a malt shop. Somebody got wise, and this young couple put in a malt shop with a pay pool table. And that became the hangout. This was after the theater closed. That was really cool. I remember that. And we got together. We had a youth council that got together. We put on a couple of dances. And we decided to block off. We got permission. They blocked off a part of Pearson Boulevard that was in front of where Harris Cafe and the hardware, Hayden's Hardware, blocked off about half a block, and we had a street dance. And we had the speakers blaring and kids out there dancing. It was great. It was really, really great. Well, about the same time, I mean, they were trying to find things to make Desert Hot Springs good. So they decided they should have a beauty pageant. Well, we didn't have a lot of high school girls in Desert Hot Springs. And somehow, probably because my mother was the librarian and my grandmother was really well known, and I got drafted. I am not, nor have I ever been, a girly girl. But I did it. And I did it for 2 years in a row. The first one was when I was a junior, which would make it 1964. And the second one was when I was a senior in 1965. I graduated in 66. We have pictures, the first one taken outside the spa, okay? And then of the second one, we have pictures, and the beauty pageant that year was held in the old theater. And the beauty pageant the next year was held in what used to be Wardman Hall, or whatever they called it, which is where the ballpark was. I show my friends those pictures now, especially the second one, because I actually look pretty good. My mother, bless her heart, much to my father's dismay, took me to Minna's, which was the place in town that you would buy the nice clothes, okay? And at that point, both years, she spent, 1 year she spent $75, and the second year she spent $100. Now, nowadays that wouldn't be much, but back in 65, 66, that was a chunk of change for a dress you were going to wear once. And I had heels dyed to match the dress. This is so not me, but it's, it's something you look back on and kind of laugh. It was a trip. I don't know if they ever had a beauty contest after that. We didn't have much to show, trust me. When we were growing up, we kids got an allowance, but we were always looking for a little extra money. And my parents made it clear that any extra money we made was ours. Didn't have to go into the household. So the first things that my brother and I did was we did watering jobs. I mean, there wasn't places where you could mow lawns. In fact, my uncle had about the only lawn that I knew of. Green grass was something you didn't see in Desert Hot Springs. And so we did a lot of water, and I did that from the time I was in elementary school, which was from like the years, graduated, I don't know, back in the 50s, let's put it that way. When I finally got old enough to legally work, which was 15 and a half, at that point, the only jobs basically open to the girls were to be a hotel maid, motel maid, or a waitress. Well, I became a busgirl at O'Hara's Cafe. Before then, my brother had been a busboy and dishwasher there. So the O'Haras hired me on at 15 and a half, and I became a busgirl, and then later became a waitress. And I worked there as a waitress all the way through high school for 4 years. And it wasn't bad, but May O'Hara did not believe in being idle. And so if there were no customers, then you were supposed to clean. And clean we did. But one of the worst things I remember is the door was supposed to close at 4. However, if people showed up a little after 4 or right at 4, she let them in regardless. And of course, we didn't get paid for this. Our pay stopped at 4. And we had to take care of them. The worst one was one time when the Gurneys came in, and they had people with them, and they decided that they wanted to have ice cream sundaes. Now, if you've ever scooped ice cream out of those big brown things, you get covered from your hand all the way up to your elbow. And so we had to make them ice cream sundaes and then stay until they left and then clean up after them. So it wasn't the most fun job in the world, but it was a job, and jobs were important. I was driving through town today because I got here about a half hour early, and just looking and trying to remember, and I got heartsick. Because growing up here, though we didn't have a lot of money, it was a good place to be. It was safe and secure, and people knew me. They knew my family. But one of the sad things, was when I left town at the age of 19 to go to college, I used to come back every weekend so that people couldn't say I left town because I was pregnant. This town, everybody knew everybody else's business. And, you know, there were like 6,000 residents or some stupid thing. And that's when they were in town. It was kind of bad that way. But coming back, all the old landmarks are gone, or changed. There's not that warm, easy feeling here that there used to be. It's not my home anymore. Hasn't been my home for a long time. And it just, it's sad. I don't know if I'll ever come back in town again. You know, come visit my cousins or my brother and sister-in-law, but I don't think I'll drive through town again. It was just too heartbreaking. I remember the old days when there was one four-way stop and no signals, when you could ride your bike. You ride it all the way up to the foothills on Pearson Boulevard, and then you start going downhill and you take your feet off the pedals and you just whiz on by, and everybody knows you and they wave to you, and it was a good place to grow up.